Jen's got a topic that she wants to address, and hopefully we'll get to discuss this more with you.
Well, it may not be nearly as interesting as the topic we were discussing just before we went live here. We're talking about boobs. So. Anyway, but no, I wanted to talk about children and religion today. And part of this was motivated by a conversation that I had with some people on the Atheist Community's Facebook page. Someone had posted a story about, she was in a grocery store with her 4-year-old son, and he had asked a question that was best explained using an evolutionary explanation. And some random theist overheard the conversation and just kind of inserted himself into that conversation and said, oh, well, Jesus made all this stuff. And so she posted the comment kind of as a rant about how, theists just feel so entitled to just step in, or some theists do feel so entitled to just step in and try to indoctrinate your children for you in the middle of a grocery store. And what happened as a result of that was there were several people who piped in with, well, it's your fault for not teaching your kid about religion already, because she had made a point that she had not yet introduced, Christianity in particular to her son. He's only 4 years old. And so my thought on that is that if you were commenting on this woman or basically taking her to task for not teaching her son about Christianity at the age of 4, then you're just as much out of line as the guy in the grocery store was. Because kids at that age, they go through a period where they're very literal, and so they may believe these things are really true. And parents are in the best position to figure out when they should introduce religion to their children. I'm a big proponent of parents taking control of that discussion early on. However, I don't necessarily think that Christianity or Islam or Judaism or any of the other, predominant religions are necessarily the best place to start for that. One of the things that I've done with my son is introduce him to Greek and Roman mythology. And part of that is that the stories are way more interesting than Christianity, for example. The Greek and Roman gods did much more cool things. That's kind of a way of introducing him to the concept of religion and inoculating him against other fantastic claims later on. Just kind of out of, serendipity, an email arrived this week from one of our fans who linked us to an article that was published in a journal, Cognitive Science. And it was about a study that was done on children who were exposed to religion early on and how they have a little bit of difficulty distinguishing fact from fiction when presented with different stories. So I wanted to share that with you very briefly. So basically, they took a group of 5 and 6-year-old children, some of whom were enrolled in parochial schools, some were enrolled in public schools, and then they further divided these between kids that regularly attended church and those who didn't. And then they exposed them to 3 different types of stories. Biblical stories, fantastical stories, where there was some element of magic or some supernatural explanation, and then realistic stories. And then they asked the children to determine if these were real or fiction. And no surprise, the kids were pretty universally good at determining which stories were, from the realistic stories. They correctly identified those as, yeah, that's real. When it came to the biblical stories, the kids who were in parochial schools and attended church, they were more likely to identify, for example, the Noah's Ark story as being real, that was an actual historical event. And then when it came to the stories where there was some element of magic in there, the kids who'd been exposed to religion in some aspect were more likely to identify the fantastical story as real. And so it doesn't definitively demonstrate that religion caused this effect, But it's a strong indication that it certainly reinforces whatever's going on that produces this inability to distinguish between what's real and what's not.
Yeah, if you're teaching magical thinking in one area, it's likely to drip over into other areas, which supports what I've been saying all along, is that your beliefs actually do matter.
Yeah.
And people want to say, oh, it's harmless. Why are you going after religion? Why are you trying to take people's religion away? Well, first of all, I'm not trying to take anything away. I'm trying to get people to give it up for good reasons. And it's because every belief that you have has the potential to inform every other belief you have. And so when you evaluate a claim, if your brain is already tuned to the idea that, hey, this sort of magical thing can happen, then you're more likely to believe things that are outlandish and undeserving of belief. Well,
and a lot of people, when we get email frequently from atheist parents who've recently deconverted, and their kids have gone to church, and they're worried, how do I undo this? They're afraid they've damaged their children in some respect. The good news is that whatever happened when they were kids, even if they're a little bit older or whatever, it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. Critical thinking actually develops with practice, and if you start teaching your children how to think instead of what to think, then they'll get better at it with practice. And it's very likely that once taught how to think properly, that they will lose that religion all on their own. So don't panic. But do take responsibility for that conversation and take control of the conversation as early as you think it's appropriate for your child.
Yeah, I don't have any kids, and I'm reluctant to dive in too deeply, especially on what decisions somebody else makes about raising their kids. Yeah. But I think that teaching them how to think instead of what to think, encouraging a healthy curiosity for discovery, an appreciation for distinguishing truth from fiction, distinguishing fantasy from reality. And there's people who are concerned, on other levels of, well, doesn't this, ruin your appreciation of like fantasy books and stuff like that? No, I'm pretty sure that if you go to to Comic-Con and other stuff, you're going to find tons and tons of atheists, probably more than you're going to at a lot of other conventions. This doesn't have to diminish the fact that you're aware that something's fantasy. It doesn't necessarily diminish from an appreciation of it at all. And just the fact that somebody was raised in a religious tradition doesn't mean they're forever stuck there. I mean, I was over 30 by the time I found my way free. And a lot of other people do as well. So it may never be too late. For some people, maybe it is too late. But I wouldn't. I don't tend to worry too much, because I have confidence that, given the right tools, the truth tends to win out.
Well, and just as an example from my own family, my son. When he was probably 5 or 6 years old, my wife took him to, in a little town out a little west of here, there's an annual event where Thomas the Train comes in, and the kids can ride Thomas the Train. And my kid was all about Thomas the Train when he was much younger. And so, he was 5 or 6 years old. He knew Thomas was not a real character, but he still was really into this, He wanted to have his picture taken with Thomas and all this stuff. And so you can see that thing going on in their head where it's this, willing suspension of disbelief for the moment so they can enjoy this, but they really don't believe it. And and we never had any concerns that he really thought Thomas was real when he was 5 years old. And it's the same thing that's going on when a kid, you take them to a theme park and they meet some cartoon character, and they think, oh wow, I want my picture taken with whatever cartoon character it is. Most of the time, by the time they're 5 or 6 years old, they don't think that character is really that character anymore. They understand it's a guy in a suit, right? But they're having fun with it. And this is how critical thinking develops. Don't panic.